The Appalachian Mountains, a spine of ancient rock and mist-shrouded peaks, have long been a place of both wonder and dread. Prepare to be immersed in a world of shadows as we delve into a tale of exorcism, set against the backdrop of this mysterious and foreboding region. In the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, far from the beaten path, lies the small, isolated county of Owsley. This place, shrouded in mist and whispering woods, seems to exist in a time of its own. The townsfolk are wary of strangers and tight-lipped about the strange occurrences that have haunted them for generations. It's here, in this unsettling atmosphere, that our story unfolds. Reverend Gabriel Falk, an old and weary exorcist, arrived in Owsley with his young apprentice, Father Samuel. The journey had been long and arduous, winding through dense forests and treacherous mountain roads. The townsfolk eyed them suspiciously as they made their way through the narrow streets, their presence causing curtains to twitch and conversations to hush. The call had not come lightly. The church, facing increasing reports of supernatural disturbances, had dispatched the Reverend reluctantly. His face bore the lines of countless battles fought against unseen forces. His once dark hair was now a mix of gray and white, and his shoulders hunched slightly from the weight of years spent serving the church. His reputation and experience meant that he was often chosen for the most challenging cases, despite his growing weariness. Falk had little choice in the matter. The church made the decision, and he was duty-bound to comply, even as the burden weighed heavily on him. This time the church had received reports from a concerned neighbor about strange and terrifying happenings centered around a young girl named Lily Carter. "Reverend, we're almost there," Samuel said, his voice tinged with both excitement and nervousness. He clutched his worn leather satchel tightly, the sacred tools of their trade inside. Falk nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Remember, Samuel, we're here to investigate first. There are protocols to follow." Samuel chuckled softly, trying to lighten the mood. "You think we might run into the Mothman out here?" Falk allowed a rare smile to tug at the corner of his lips. "If we do, you can handle the exorcism. I'll stick to the ghosts and demons." Their destination was not the Carter home, but the house next door. The call for help had come from Mrs. Hattie Griffith, a concerned neighbor. The Carters were known in town for their skepticism of anything beyond the tangible world. They did not believe in God or any higher power, dismissing such notions as relics of a bygone era. They had no idea the church had been contacted. Mrs. Griffith's home was a small, weathered cottage, its garden overgrown with weeds. As they approached, an old wooden wind chime clattered softly in the breeze. Falk knocked on the door, and it creaked open to reveal a frail, elderly woman with piercing blue eyes. "Oh, thank God, Reverend," she greeted them, her voice a mix of relief and fear. "The kettle's just going on. Come in, we should talk inside." The cottage was dimly lit, filled with the scent of dried herbs and the muffled game show on the TV. Mrs. Griffith led them to a small sitting room, where the walls were adorned with faded photographs and religious icons. "I didn't know who else to call," she began, her hands trembling slightly. "The Carter's kid. She's not right. I've seen things, heard things. The family refuses to believe it, but I know there's something evil at work." Reverend Falk nodded, his expression grave. "We're here to help, Mrs. Griffith. Can you tell us what you've observed?" "Well," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she poured tea for her guests. "Things that don't belong in this world. Lily, she's not herself anymore. It's as if something else is living inside her." "Can you tell us more about what you've seen?" Reverend Falk asked gently. She took a deep breath, her gaze distant, as if recalling a nightmare. "Lily was such a sweet girl," she began, her voice tinged with sadness. "Always cheerful, always with a smile and a laugh that could chase away the gloomiest day. But then she changed, little by little. I started seeing bruises on her arms and legs, and she stopped being her bright, happy self. She wouldn't say hello anymore, just walked by with this haunted look in her eyes. Her hands trembled as she continued. Then it started. I could see her talking to herself or to something that wasn't there, and I'd see her standing at her window, but it wasn't her. Her eyes were empty, and she would just stand there, staring out into the night. I saw strange symbols drawn on her window pane one morning, like nothing I've ever seen before. You could hear the screams from their house echoing through the night. It was like something out of a horror story. I knew I had to do something, so I called for help. Thank God you've come to save her. Father Samuel listened intently, his mind racing with questions. Can you describe the symbols? He asked. They looked ancient. I know it was something dark, something evil. I tried to draw them, but it's as if they won't stay in my memory. Reverend Falk exchanged a glance with Father Samuel, the gravity of her words sinking in. They knew they needed more evidence before they could proceed with an exorcism, and Mrs. Griffith's account provided a crucial piece of the puzzle. The Carters, they won't listen. They think it's just illness, but I know better. Falk stood up, his demeanor grave. We'll investigate. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Griffith. Your observations are invaluable. After their initial encounter with Mrs. Griffith, Falk and Samuel retreated to the quiet of their temporary lodging in Owsley. The quaint inn, with its flickering electric lamps and creaky floorboards, provided a temporary respite from the eerie tension that hung over the county. Falk sat at a small wooden desk, his weathered hands clasped tightly as he reviewed the notes he had taken during their investigation. Samuel paced restlessly, his mind racing with questions and uncertainties. Reverend, Samuel began, breaking the silence that had settled between them. What do you make of all this? I'm not convinced this is supernatural, Samuel. It could be a case of the parents physically harming Lily, and we need to find more evidence before jumping to conclusions. But the symbols, the whispers, they point to something more, Samuel pressed, his voice tinged with eagerness. We need to perform the exorcism. Falk sighed, his gaze turning inward as he recalled the process that had led them here. I haven't talked to the church yet, he admitted. Cases like Lily's often blur the line between psychological and physical abuse, and in rare cases, supernatural influence. He paused, running a hand through his gray-streaked hair. I haven't conducted interviews with other townsfolk yet. Most are reluctant to speak, wary of inviting unwanted attention, but Mrs. Griffith, she came forward with her observations. Her account provided enough substance to warrant further investigation. Samuel, a new priest and newly ordained, couldn't contain his excitement. I think it could be a real possession, Reverend. The symbols, the whispers, everything points to it. We need to perform the exorcism as soon as possible. His enthusiasm was palpable, a stark contrast to Falk's weariness. Falk studied the young priest for a moment. Samuel's eagerness was driven by his naivety to the priesthood, his belief untainted by the many years of experience that had made Falk more cautious and methodical. This was Samuel's first major case, and he was determined to see it through. The following morning, they visited the Carter house, an old, creaking structure half swallowed by overgrown foliage. The family greeted them with a mix of hostility and reluctance. The air was thick with tension, and Father Samuel could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him. He tried to maintain his enthusiasm, but the palpable dread gnawed at his resolve. Mrs. Carter stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, and her expression one of barely concealed hostility.
We don't believe in your kind of help,
she said sharply.
But Hattie wouldn't leave us alone about it.
We only wish to help your daughter, Reverend Falk said gently. May we see her? Mrs. Carter's eyes hardened further.
No, we don't need your superstitions here. Just leave.
Dismissed. Reverend Falk and Father Samuel left the Carter house, their minds troubled by what they had seen and heard. They knew they needed more information to proceed, and their investigation had only just begun. The days following their visit to the Carter house were filled with unease. They spent their time investigating the strange occurrences around Owsley and started to notice strange symbols appearing in various places throughout the town, scratched into the bark of trees, etched into the sides of buildings, and even drawn in the dust on windows. While they couldn't be certain if these were the same symbols Mrs. Griffith had described, Falk meticulously documented each one, his unease growing with every new discovery. As they expanded their investigation and spoke with more townsfolk, most remained tight-lipped, their fear of attracting attention keeping them silent. However, one night as they walked through the town square, a disheveled man stumbled up to them, reeking of alcohol and desperation. "Spare some change, fathers?" he slurred, reaching out with a trembling hand. Samuel, compassionate by nature, reached into his pocket, but Falk's stern hand stopped him. "We don't fuel vices," he said firmly. The man's face twisted in spite. "You think you're better than us, don't you, Reverend? Holier than thou, eh?" He spat on the ground. "Preaching about demons and devils, while the real evil's right here in this town." Samuel's eyes widened and he grabbed the man's arm. "What do you mean?" The man sneered. "Them Carters, none of them are what they seem. Everyone here's hiding something. They're all evil, even you priests. You think you're saviors, but you're just as lost." Falk's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, evil?" The man spat on the ground. "Figure it out yourselves, priests. Just know everyone in this town dabbles in the occult. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need another drink." He staggered away, leaving them with more questions than answers. That evening, they visited the town library, hoping to find more information on the symbols they found. Mrs. Montgomery, the elderly librarian, greeted them with a mixture of curiosity and gossip. "Reverend Father, what brings you here?" she asked, her voice tinged with the excitement of a potential story. "We're looking for information on some symbols we found around town," Falk explained, showing her his notes. "Have you seen anything like this before?" Mrs. Montgomery's eyes widened. "Why, yes, I have. They're strange, aren't they? I saw something similar in an old book we have in the back. The Carter kid used to borrow it often before she stopped coming. Such a sweet girl, always smiling, but her parents, they're harsh people. Shame what's happening to that poor girl." She retrieved a dusty, leather-bound book from a high shelf and handed it to Falk. "I believe this is what you're looking for. It's written in Latin, though." Falk opened the book, his eyes scanning the pages filled with ancient writings and illustrations. He paused at a page depicting symbols similar to those they had found. "These symbols are the same," he muttered, his finger tracing the lines. As Falk read through the ancient text, he found references to the same symbols they had discovered. His face grew increasingly troubled. Samuel and Mrs. Montgomery watched him intently. Samuel looked over his shoulder, curiosity evident in his eyes. "What does it say, Reverend?" Falk's face grew pale. "These symbols are part of a ritual to summon an angel. The writings describe a powerful entity, the fallen angel Samyaza." Samuel asked, "Reverend, what's the significance of Samyaza?" Falk took a deep breath. "Samyaza is mentioned in some texts, but not from our Bible. He was the leader of the fallen men of God who mated with the daughters of men. His offspring were giants of great power and wickedness. If someone is trying to summon Samyaza, according to this, they would need a host who is pure and innocent. Lily would be the ideal vessel." "Reverend, we need to talk to the church about this." Falk nodded. "Yes, we do. We need guidance on how to proceed." Later that night, as Falk discussed his findings with the church, Samuel grew increasingly restless. "We need to confront her parents. If they're behind this, we can't let it continue." Falk nodded, but his caution was evident. "We will, but we need to be careful. We need guidance from the church. For now, I need you to pray." Impatient and driven by his fervor, Samuel couldn't wait. Without Falk's knowledge, he decided to talk to Mrs. Griffith on his own regarding what they have found. He couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out and that they needed answers immediately. "Hattie," Samuel called out, banging on the door. "We need to talk." Mrs. Griffith opened the door, her expression calm and composed. "Father Samuel, what brings you here at this hour?" Samuel stepped inside, his voice firm. "We've been investigating Lily's situation, and we've found some disturbing things. Symbols, rituals, and rumors about her parents." Mrs. Griffith's eyes gleamed with a sinister light. "Oh, Father, you're so naive. It's not the parents you should be worried about." Samuel's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Griffith's demeanor changed in an instant. Her face twisted into a cruel smile. "You poor, misguided priest. It was never about Lily. She was just the bait to lure you here." Before Samuel could react, Mrs. Griffith raised her hands, chanting in an ancient language. Dark energy filled the room, and Samuel was thrown back, his body immobilized by the force of her power. "You see, Father, I needed someone with spiritual strength, someone innocent and pure like you. You'll be a worthy host for my master." Samuel struggled against the invisible bonds holding him, fear and determination battling within him. "You won't succeed. Falk will stop you." Mrs. Griffith laughed, a sound that chilled Samuel to the bone. "We'll see about that." As Samuel's vision began to blur, he prayed silently for the Reverend to arrive in time. The final confrontation was upon them, and the fate of Owsley hung in the balance. Reverend Falk ended the call with the church, their instructions clear. From the other room, he spoke aloud. "Samuel, we have to wait for further instructions. If the parents won't let us intervene, we can't offer any help." Silence answered him. Frowning, Falk entered the room and found it empty. Samuel's satchel was gone. "Damn it, Samuel," Falk muttered, a sinking feeling in his gut. He knew where the young priest had gone. Grabbing his coat and holy artifacts, Falk raced out of their lodging and headed towards the Carter house, hoping he wasn't too late. As Falk approached the Carters' home, he saw Mrs. Carter standing on the porch, wringing her hands in distress.
"Reverend Falk, Samuel went into Hattie's house. I tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen."
Falk nodded grimly. "Thank you. Get inside and lock the doors. This is dangerous." He could already hear the faint sounds of screams and chanting coming from Hattie's house next door. Heart pounding, he sprinted toward the source of the noise. Falk burst through the door of Hattie's house, his senses assaulted by an overwhelming sense of malevolence. The dimly lit living room was a scene of chaos, furniture overturned, shadows dancing eerily on the walls. In the center of the room stood Hattie and Samuel, who was bound and struggling against his restraints. "Stop this!" Falk commanded, holding up a crucifix. "Release him!" Hattie turned her gaze toward Falk, a twisted smile on her lips. "You're too late, Reverend. The ritual is complete. Samyaza will have his host, and your young priest will serve his purpose." "You don't have to do this," Falk pleaded between chants. "There's still time to repent. Let go of this darkness." Hattie's laughter filled the room as she unleashed a wave of dark energy. Falk countered with a spray of holy water, the liquid sizzling as it made contact with her skin. She screamed in pain, but the malevolent force within her fought back fiercely. "You're nothing but a puppet!" Falk shouted, advancing on her with his crucifix held high. "In the name of God, I command you to leave this vessel." As Falk recited the exorcism rites, Hattie's body convulsed violently. Hattie's laughter filled the room. "He's here, Reverend. It's done. Bow to my master." "By the power of Christ, I compel you," Falk shouted, pressing the crucifix to her forehead. "Leave this woman and return to the abyss." Hattie let out a final, ear-piercing scream as the dark presence was forced from her body. She collapsed to the floor, unconscious but alive. Samuel's body jerked as he struggled against the demonic force, but Samyaza's hold was too strong.
"Ah, you pious charlatan!"
Samuel's voice sneered, an eerie blend of his own and the demon's.
"Did you think your feeble faith could save you?
Reverend Falk's eyes narrowed. "Release him! In the name of God, I command you!" Samyaza laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the room.
Command me. You who hide behind your prayers and rituals thinking they give you power. You are nothing but a fool.
Falk held up his crucifix, his voice steady. "By the power of Christ, I compel you." The demon sneered, its malevolent gaze fixed on Falk.
Christ? Your Christ is weak. Your God is absent. Look around you, worm. Your faith crumbles. Your church decays. You are all alone in this battle.
Samuel's body convulsed, the struggle within him evident. "Fight, Samuel!" Falk shouted. "Don't let it control you." Samyaza's eyes gleamed with malice.
He is mine now. His purity, his innocence, all twisted and corrupted. And you will witness as I destroy everything you hold dear.
"Never!" Falk began to recite the exorcism prayers, each word laced with conviction and determination. Samyaza howled, Samuel's face contorting in pain.
You cannot win! This body, this soul, belongs to me.
With a final desperate effort, Falk pressed the crucifix against Samuel's forehead. "I cast you out. Leave this vessel and return to the darkness from whence you came." Samuel's body convulsed violently, his screams piercing the air. For a moment it seemed as if the demon might be expelled, but then Samyaza's voice returned, dripping with venom.
Your pathetic efforts are in vain. You are weak. Your pitiful God is gone.
In that desperate moment, Falk's faith surged. With a swift motion, he pulled a consecrated blade from the hilt of his crucifix, a relic blessed with the divine power to combat evil. Lunging forward, Falk aimed the blade at Samuel's heart, invoking divine intervention with every ounce of his being. "God, come down and aid your servant," Falk cried out, his voice filled with conviction and desperation. The blade struck true for a split second, piercing Samuel's chest. For an instant, a surge of divine energy coursed through the blade, weakening Samyaza's grip on Samuel's soul. But the demon's strength was formidable, and with a roar of defiance, Samyaza expelled the blade with supernatural force, sending Falk staggering back.
You dare defy me? I am eternal!
Undeterred, Falk pressed on, his resolve unshaken. The room trembled with the struggle, the air thick with spiritual warfare. Samuel's eyes flickered briefly, a glimmer of his true self breaking through the demonic influence. With a final surge of strength, Falk drove his holy blade into Samuel's heart again, tears streaming down his face. "Forgive me, Samuel." The young priest's body went rigid, and for a moment his eyes cleared, showing a fleeting moment of peace. "Thank you," Samuel's voice whispered before his body fell lifeless to the floor. The room fell silent, the air heavy with sorrow and loss. Falk collapsed to his knees, cradling the lifeless body of his young apprentice. The battle was over, but the cost was immense. Falk's heart ached with the weight of his actions, knowing that in his effort to save Samuel he had lost him forever. Falk felt an overwhelming sense of grief and guilt. The encounter with Samyaza had left scars that no prayer could heal. Returning to the church, Falk reported the tragic events. The higher authorities, while understanding, saw the toll it had taken on him. They offered their condolences and a chance for him to retire from active duty. Falk accepted, knowing his days of exorcism were over. The shadows he had fought for so long had left a permanent mark on his soul. He retreated to a quiet life, haunted by memories and the faces of those he couldn't save, but still holding on to a glimmer of faith that one day the world might be free from such darkness.